You didn't have to do any of this, she said. He looked at her across the table, the same woman he'd watched from 40 stories up, folding a blanket around her daughter in the rain, and said, I know. That's why I did it. Before we dive in, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy stories like this, be sure to like the video, subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and share it with someone who'd love it too. And his name was Conrad Ellison, 51 years old, founder and CEO of Ellison Capital, a private equity firm with offices in Chicago, New York, and Dubai. He had the kind of wealth that stopped being real money a long time ago and became something more abstract. A number on a screen that other people managed while he made decisions that moved it higher. He lived on the 42nd floor of a building he owned. Not the building where his company operated, that was 12 blocks south. All glass and reclaimed steel, and a lobby that had been featured in Architectural Digest. This was his personal building, 12 units. He occupied the top 2 floors and kept the others as investments, renting them to people whose net worth he could calculate in his head before they finished introducing themselves. His mornings started at 5. Black coffee, no sugar, 45 minutes on the Peloton while reviewing overnight market reports on a screen mounted to the wall. Shower. On a suit selected by someone whose job it was to select suits. A car waiting downstairs by 6:45. He was not a cruel man. That was the thing people got wrong about Conrad Ellison. He wasn't the villain of any story he'd ever been close to. He was simply efficient. He had learned early that sentimentality was expensive, that emotion clouded analysis, and that the fastest way to fail in his world was to care about the wrong things at the wrong time. He had been married once, 14 years. His ex-wife, Dana, had said something to him at the end that he still thought about sometimes, standing at the window of his penthouse at night. Conrad, you're very good at providing. You've never once learned how to be present. He had not argued the point. He'd had his attorney handle the paperwork within the week. He had no children, so he had a calendar full of obligations, and a wine cellar full of bottles he rarely opened, and a view of Chicago that most people would have sold something important to wake up to every morning. He didn't look at the view anymore. He looked at his phone. Her name was Deja Simmons, 31 years old. From the south side of Chicago, born third of 5 children to a mother who worked 2 jobs and a father who left when Deja was 7 and sent birthday cards until she was 12 and then stopped. She had been, before everything unraveled, a licensed practical nurse at a mid-size hospital on the Northwest Side. She was good at it, not just technically competent, but genuinely good at it. The kind of nurse who remembered patients' names 3 days after discharge, and kept small notes on her phone about which elderly patients had no family coming to visit, so she could spend an extra few minutes with them on her break. She had a daughter, Amara, 6 years old. Gap-toothed smile. As a collection of 37 hair ties she kept in a Ziploc bag and treated like currency, and the particular confidence of a child who has always felt deeply loved, even when the circumstances around that love were difficult. The circumstances had become very difficult. It started with the hospital's restructuring, a polite word for the quiet elimination of positions that cost more than they generated. Deja's department was downsized in March. She was given 2 weeks' notice and a pamphlet about unemployment benefits. She applied for 37 jobs in 6 weeks. She got 3 callbacks, 1 offer, rescinded before she started because the position was frozen. She was not unusual. She was just one of thousands of people that particular economic moment had decided to set down without warning. The apartment went first. She was 2 months behind when the notice came. She had a cousin in Evanston who let her and Amara stay for 3 weeks before the cousin's landlord discovered the arrangement and threatened lease termination. She had a church friend who offered a couch for 10 days. She had a women's shelter that had a 60-day wait list. She ended up, on a Tuesday night in November, standing under the overhang of a building on Michigan Avenue, with Amara asleep against her shoulder and a rolling suitcase and a backpack and the very specific kind of exhaustion that comes from running out of options. The building was Conrad Ellison's. She wasn't there because she knew that. She was there because the overhang was wide, and the doorman had gone inside, and the wind off the lake was the kind of cold that made every other consideration secondary. She spread a blanket on the concrete lip of a raised planter near the entrance. She settled Amara into her lap. She pulled a second blanket around both of them and sat very still and watched the street and did not cry. She had made a decision somewhere in the previous weeks to save crying for when Amara was asleep so that the child would not see it, and she had kept to that decision with a discipline that would have impressed anyone who understood what it cost. And Conrad saw them at 6:47 the next morning. He was in the back of his car, pulling out of the underground garage, when the headlights swept across the entrance overhang. A woman, a child, a neat stack of luggage that told him immediately this was not casual. People who slept rough didn't usually have a rolling suitcase with a luggage tag and a child's backpack with a cartoon character on it. His car moved past them. He looked back once through the rear window. He looked at his phone. He didn't make any calls. They were there the second morning. The doorman, a man named Pete, who had worked the building for 11 years, told Conrad when he came down that the woman had been polite, quiet, and gone by 6 a.m. both days. She hadn't asked anyone for anything, she just used the overhang. Conrad said, "Let me know if there are any issues." Pete said there hadn't been any issues. Conrad got in his car. They were there the third morning, and the fourth. So on the fifth morning it rained. A hard, driving November rain that came sideways off the lake and made the overhang only partially useful. Conrad stood at his window on the 42nd floor at 5:50 a.m. with his coffee and watched the woman below pull both blankets tighter around the child and angle herself so that her own body blocked the wind from reaching the girl. He stood there for a long time. He went and got his phone. He made one call, not to his assistant. Not to his attorney, to Pete. "The woman outside," he said. "Bring her up to Unit 4, it's vacant. Turn the heat on." Pete was quiet for a moment. "Sir?" "You heard me," Conrad said, and hung up. She didn't want to come up. Pete told Conrad later that she'd stood there in the rain for a full 2 minutes, asking what the catch was, who had sent for her, what she would owe. Pete had told her there was no catch. She had looked at him with the eyes of someone who had been told there was no catch before. She came up because of Amara, because the child was shivering, because there are things a mother will accept for her child that she would never accept for herself. Unit 4 was a 2-bedroom on the 8th floor. Furnished, clean, empty. It smelled like fresh paint and central heating. Amara walked in and said, "Mama, there's a real bed." Deja stood in the doorway with her hand on the frame and did not say anything for a moment. Then she said, Yes, baby, there is. Conrad did not go down to meet her that day, or the next. He had Pete leave an envelope with a note. The note said, Unit 4 is available through the end of the year. No conditions. If you need anything, ask Pete. It was signed with his initials. Nothing else. She left a note back with Pete the following morning. It said, I don't know why you're doing this, but my daughter slept warm last night. Thank you doesn't cover it, but it's what I have. Conrad read the note standing in his kitchen. He folded it and put it in the drawer next to the coffee maker. He didn't examine why. He didn't intend for there to be more contact than that. But buildings are small worlds, and small worlds have their own gravity. He saw her for the first time in the lobby 2 weeks later. She was coming back from somewhere, coat damp, paper bag of groceries in one arm, a Mara in the other. She saw him and stopped. She clearly knew who he was. Pete had apparently been less discreet than instructed. She looked at him directly. No performance, no excessive gratitude, just direct. Mr. Ellison, she said. Ms. Simmons, he said, because Pete had also told him her name. Your building is warm, she said. My daughter says it smells like a swimming pool because of the heat. She means it as a compliment. He almost smiled. He wasn't sure what stopped him. Habit, probably. Good, he said, and got in the elevator. December came. Deja found a part-time position at a clinic on the north side, not nursing, medical reception, a third of her previous salary, but income. Real income. She took it. Every morning she was up by 5:30. She dressed Amara in the bathroom so the light wouldn't wake her too early. She made oatmeal on the stove and packed it in a thermos. She left notes for Amara on the kitchen table. Little drawings, mostly, animals with speech bubbles saying things like, I love you more than 37 hair ties. She did not know Conrad could see the light in Unit 4 from his floor. She did not know he had started noticing when it came on. She left a plate of food with Pete for him once, cornbread and a container of her mother's red beans recipe. Pete delivered it looking like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to. Conrad opened the container and stood at his kitchen counter and ate it without sitting down, and finished the whole thing, and did not call anyone to tell them about it because there was no one in his life he would have known how to tell. She did it again the following week, and the week after. He never acknowledged it. She never stopped. Christmas Eve. Conrad was working. He was always working on holidays. And the office was empty, and the building was quiet, and he sat at his desk and answered emails and told himself this was fine, because it had always been fine before, and the math hadn't changed. At 7 p.m., Pete called the intercom. Miss Simmons is asking if you'd like to come down for dinner, sir. She said... Pete paused. Clearly reading something. She said she made too much food and she doesn't like waste and you don't have to stay long. Conrad sat with the intercom button held down for several seconds without speaking. Tell her I'll come down for 30 minutes, he said. He stayed for 4 hours. Amara showed him her hair tie collection. She explained the organizational system. By color first, then by size, and then by what she called special ones, which had no discernible classification system beyond personal significance. She explained this to him with the gravity of a CEO presenting a quarterly report. He listened to every word. He did not fall in love with Deja Simmons. This is not that story. What happened was quieter, and in some ways more significant than that. What happened was that Conrad Ellison, a man who had spent 3 decades being excellent at distance, found himself sitting at a kitchen table on the 8th floor of his own building, eating food that someone had made with their hands, listening to a 6-year-old explain the emotional value of a glittery purple hair tie, and felt, for the first time in longer than he could accurately remember, that he was actually somewhere. Not in transit, not managing, not optimizing. Somewhere. Then he went back to his floor that night and stood at the window and looked at the city and felt it differently than he had before. He couldn't have explained it. He didn't try. January brought a conversation he hadn't planned. Deja told him, over coffee in the lobby, because they had developed the habit of running into each other in the lobby, that she'd found a real apartment. Affordable, safe neighborhood. She could move in February 1st. He said, "Good." She looked at him. I want you to know what this did," she said. "Not just the roof, She stopped, started again. "I was starting to believe the story, that we were going to be okay, that things were temporary. And then temporary kept getting longer and I was starting to not believe it anymore." She looked at her coffee cup. "You gave us a place to land. That's not small." He said, "You gave me cornbread on a Thursday. That's not small either." She looked up. "I ate it standing at my counter," he said. "Alone, and it was the best meal I'd had in probably 2 years." He paused. "That should embarrass me more than it does." She smiled. He did too. Fully, this time. Nothing stopping it. February came. She moved, but Conrad had already made 2 more calls by then. The first was to the director of a nursing re-employment program he'd quietly funded for 3 years without much personal involvement. He asked them to look at a specific candidate. The second was to his attorney, who handled the paperwork for a scholarship account he set up in Amara's name. Fully funded through college. No conditions, no strings. The paperwork was signed and sealed before Deja knew it existed. She found out by mail. She called Pete. Pete told her he couldn't comment. She stood in her new apartment holding the letter and did not call Conrad for 3 days because she needed 3 days to find the right words. When she called, she said, "You didn't have to do any of this." He said, "I know. That's why I did it." 2 years later, Deja Simmons was working as a registered nurse again. A different hospital, a better unit, a schedule that let her be home when Amara got off the school bus. Amara had 44 hair ties. She'd given 3 away to friends she decided deserved them. Conrad Ellison still lived on the 42nd floor. But he'd converted one of his vacant units into transitional housing for families. Not a charity project with a press release, just 6 apartments, quietly managed, quietly filled, quietly emptied and filled again as people got back to standing on their own. He still had the note Deja left with Pete that first morning, the one about her daughter sleeping warm. It was still in the drawer next to the coffee maker. He still didn't examine why. And here is what this story knows that sometimes we forget. Kindness is not always loud. Sometimes it is a woman making cornbread for a man she has no reason to thank, because she was raised to bring something when someone opens a door. Sometimes it is a man standing at a 42nd floor window at 5:50 in the morning, watching a stranger shield her child from the wind and deciding, quietly, without announcement, that he has enough room. You don't always know what you're giving someone when you give it. You don't always know what you're receiving, but somewhere in the accumulation of small things, a plate of food, a note left with a doorman, a 6-year-old explaining her hair tie collection like it's the most important briefing you'll attend all year. Somewhere in all of that, people find each other. And sometimes, that is exactly enough. If this story stayed with you, I share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one quiet decision can change the entire trajectory of a life. Subscribe if you haven't. There are more stories like this one waiting for you.